commonwealth who are not being cared for by their families or by the church. I think we ought not to take the position that the government steps outside of its sphere of proper activity when it does assume a certain responsibility to take care of the poor. I think that's proposition number one. Now, I'm fully aware of the fact that whenever the government takes this kind of work on itself, it makes a botch of it. I'm aware of that. That's part of living in a sinful world. And I'm fully aware of the fact, too, that the poor and the not so poor abuse this sort of a thing in the most horrible ways imaginable. And I'm sure you can all come up here with a dozen horror stories of how our welfare system is abused in our present day. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm only saying that in a sinful world, we're in a commonwealth, all the citizens do not belong to the church. The government has a certain responsibility to take care of the needs of the poor within that commonwealth who are genuinely in need. And I don't think we ought to be talking tonight about whether or not the government in fact has that responsibility. In the second place, in connection with that, I want to reiterate what I said earlier, that there is a fundamental difference between the government's care for the poor and the church's care for the poor. You remember when I was talking about this at an earlier time that I listed about 4 or 5 differences, fundamental, basic differences between the work of the government in caring for the poor and the work of the church, as the deacons are responsible for that calling. And I don't want to leave the impression, because that's wrong, that when the government cares for its poor, it's doing the work of Christ. That isn't it. That's just simply part of functioning as a government in a sinful world. In the third place, the problem comes up where you get the government helping the poor in the church. That's where the problem comes up, as far as you and I are concerned anyway. Now, there may be different reasons for that. On the one hand, the government may itself, almost as it does sometimes, foist its help on the poor, so that they almost throw the money at the poor in the church. On the other hand, you may have a situation in the church where the people prefer to go to the government when in need than they do to the deacons. And this is the concrete problem which deacons often face in the Church of Christ. The poor prefer to seek help in government welfare programs rather than in going to the diaconate and in going in that way to Christ. Another problem that arises in this connection, as you all know, and probably know better than I do, that it's not always so easy to sort out what are truly programs to help the poor and what are sort of what you might call insurance programs which the government promotes. And I'm talking now about the difference between, for example, Social Security and Medicare on the one side and Medicaid on the other side, and aid to dependent children, ADC, and that sort of a thing. There are programs which the government sponsors which are, broadly speaking, insurance programs, which we are by law required to participate in. Just about anyway. I'm not a member of Social Security, happily. I never give them a dime for that. But almost everybody else is supposed to pay. That's the law. While on the other hand, you have these welfare programs. And I'm aware of the fact, too, that to draw the line between what is a government insurance program and what is a welfare program is not always so easy to do. There are gray areas sometimes in some of these government programs where you can seriously ask yourself the question, is this really a kind of what I call insurance program, so that it's a legitimate program, or does this really finally come down just flatly to welfare? that it's government supporting the poor. The line is not easy to draw. And so, the deacons face the question in their work of how they are going to assume their responsibilities before Christ, as Christ has given these responsibilities to them, and encourage the people and instruct the people to seek help when they are poor from the diaconate rather than the government, and therefore keep the government from intruding into the affairs of the Church of Christ. That's a concrete problem which deacons face, and it's a difficult one, and extraordinarily difficult in our modern age. I want to emphasize in that connection just a couple of points. Number one, I made the remark at the very beginning of this course that this battle to keep the government out of the affairs of the church is a battle that goes back centuries and centuries. The church has always had her struggle with this. And sometimes the church has just simply caved in and said, okay, we're not going to fight it any longer. In that case, of course, ultimately the church is robbed of an important part of her calling. In other cases, the church has resisted insofar as she was able all these efforts on the part of the government to intrude in the work of the church. And there is an article in the church order which obligates the church to do this too. I presume you are aware of the article. It doesn't speak exactly of the office of deacons, but it nevertheless speaks indirectly of that office. And I refer to oh boy, where's that article now? I thought I knew where it was. It's an article which speaks of the fact that the church must do her utmost, I think it mentions even to the point of suffering, to resist the efforts of the government to intrude upon the royal rule of Christ in his church. I bet you that's it. Yes. The consistory shall take care that the churches, for the possession of their property and the peace and order of their meetings, can claim the protection of the authorities. It should be well understood, however, that for the sake of peace and material possession, they may never suffer the royal government of Christ over his church to be in the least infringed upon. Now it speaks there of the royal government. But the point of the article is, nevertheless, that the church must be jealous that the government in no way takes over the work which belongs to the church. The church must see to that to the utmost of her ability. The church order binds us to that. And so, in the second place, I want to emphasize that the reason why the church must resist insofar as she possibly can the intrusion of the government into the work of the church is, number one, that pointed and sharp statement of the scriptures that you find in the book of Proverbs: the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. I quoted that text to you before in connection with this point, and I'd like to have you underscore that in your minds. When the wicked show mercy, as the government does in its welfare programs, fundamentally and basically that mercy is a cruel mercy. And all the welfare programs in this country are proof that that is exactly the case too. Government welfare is ultimately cruel, while the mercies of Christ are healing and restorative and comforting and a blessing to the poor and to the church. In the third place, therefore, if the government should ever succeed in robbing the church of the office of deacon, and taking over the office of deacon, as I'm personally convinced the government is intent on doing, the church will suffer shipwreck, because that particular office of Christ himself will no longer be present in the church. And if the office of mercy is no longer present in the church, then the church will soon die. It's that serious a business. The office of mercy, brethren, is just as important in the church as is the office of the ministry of the word and the office of the rule of the elders. Just as important. It may not be relegated to third-class status. It may not be put on the shelf as being incidental to the life of the church. It may not ever be considered just simply to be something which is nice if necessary, but not really crucial to the church's spiritual growth and prosperity. It's just as important. The church will die if she doesn't have the ministry. The church will die if the elders don't rule. But believe me, brethren, the church will die if the office of deacons is destroyed in the church. It will. It will. But that's the most vulnerable spot, you see, when the government is looking for the Achilles heel of the church. The government knows that the soft underbelly of the church's life is to touch the church in her pocketbook, because covetousness is a great temptation to us all. And I'm personally convinced that the devil is determined to destroy the church and is going to make it his business to try to get at the church, especially through a destruction of the office of deacon. And so, while I by no means have all the answers to these questions, and while I by no means believe that we can answer all these questions tonight, and while I sympathize with you deacons who must struggle with these things, I want to underscore that you must be on your guard, and you must do all in your power as office bearers in the Church of Christ to resist these constant efforts on the part of the government to intrude in the work of the church. And you must resist that with might and main. The welfare of the Church of Christ itself is at stake. It's a battle. And it's a battle that is of great, great seriousness for the church. And I hope you men recognize that and take this part of your calling seriously. I'm not going to try to solve all the problems for you. I can't do that. And I'm pretty sure I can't even answer all the questions. But in general, that must be your approach, your fundamental and basic approach to this problem. So I've said my piece. Now, it's 9:15, but it's the last class. We can go a little longer. Who wants to respond? Who wants to comment? Who wants to say anything about this? It's easy, you know. Don't forget it. It's the easy way for us just simply to say, let the government do it. It's easy for the poor, and it's easy for the deacons to say, let the government do it. And it's easy for the church as a whole to say, let the government do it. It's not going to cost us all these bucks. Let the government do it. We pay our taxes. Let the government do it. We shove money into the welfare programs of the government. Why shouldn't we get that money back? We don't have to give our hard-earned cash then for the care of the poor. Let the government do it. That's the easy way. But that's the way to surrender. That's the way to compromise. And I tell you, men, if we lose that office in the church, as the government is determined that we shall, that's the end. That's the end. Just as surely as if we lose the ministry of the word. I'm convinced of that. The tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. In the church too. When the saints are the objects of the benevolence of the government, those mercies of the government are cruel. And they're cruel because they destroy. They destroy a man. They destroy, you can see it. They rob a man of his incentive to work. They undermine all morality so that people on welfare are whores. They destroy the spiritual life of those whom they help. That will happen in the church too. Those mercies of the government of the wicked will be just as cruel. And that's why we must do all we can to resist this. And we must fight against this for the sake of the church and for the sake of Christ, whose name we represent. Okay, go ahead. Any of you want to say anything? Joe.
Would you say then that society in general, through the emphasis placed on insurance programs, through medical health insurance programs, and those being taken out of your wage, or that's part of your wage, has robbed from the church as much as the government has? Or is attempting to rob from the church with those programs?
I don't believe that a genuine insurance program is per se wrong.
I didn't say that.
No, I know you didn't. But I mean, whether it's run by a company or by a government.
Right, but in general idea, society as we live in it today, no one can afford to be without insurance.
Right.
And that everyone gets it. I mean, anyone who works gets it.
Right.
And it's considered part of a job as much as workstations.
Right.
And in that sense, the church has the, where the church in the past had a place where they helped out, now it no longer has it.
Okay, I see what you mean. That insurance programs in their very nature have so helped people in times of affliction that they don't need the help of the deacons.
Right, and other people feel, well, I pay my insurance, why don't he pay his?
Yeah. Okay, I think that's another danger. I say that insurance is not per se wrong. And obviously, there are some instances where we have to have insurance. But I think insurance can become a great evil too. I think it can. One man said to me once, he said, no matter what happens to me, I'm covered. That's what he said to me. He said to him, so the Lord can't do anything to you anymore. You got it all taken care of. Well, that's what he was saying. He was saying, no matter what the Lord does to me, I'm covered. Then your insurance policies have become your idol. And we certainly have to be very, very careful of that. There are other problems, Catastrophic illness nowadays, for example, can run up medical bills to such tremendously high levels that it becomes almost impossible for a small church to help a person with bills like that. It's one of the facts of life. And the deacons face the question, when a person has a catastrophic illness and runs up $100,000, $200,000 in medical bills, which is not at all unusual, how are they going to help? Or are they going to tell such a man, go to the government forces? Those are problems. You got the same thing with people who get old. 50 years ago, a man worked till he was 70 years old, and then he was worn out, and he quit his work, and he went home, and he died, and the Lord took him to heaven. Now you retire at 62 or 65, and through the wonders of modern medicine, you can expect to live maybe to 85 or 90. But when you get to be about 75 or 80, you get shoved in a rest home, and the bills there are about $500 a week. Who's going to pay the bill? Family, church, government. And if a congregation of 30 or 40 families has 5 old people in it, and their bills are running, say, $10,000 a month total, how in the world is the church going to pay $10,000 a month? A small congregation, $10,000 a month to rest homes for people who can't be cared for in their family. I'm aware of all these problems. And they're not all covered with insurance either, as you know. I think the day is coming in the future when the people of God are going to have to come to the point where they're going to have to refuse to seek medical help in times of grave illness. Or, put it the other way, where medical help will not be available to them, although it's available to others, that it will be part of their suffering for Christ's sake. I think that time has come. And the deacons wrestle with these problems and struggle with them. And I don't have all the answers. I just want to warn you where the battle lines are being drawn so that you may be aware of it, conscious of it. Doug?
At the time of the state church, just before the secession in 1834, the government supported the church. They supported the ministers. They supported the professors of the seminary. I don't know if they supported the students or not.
Mm-hmm.
But was there actually an office of deacon then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What did they do?
Well, you see, that's where the battle came. The government would care for the poor through the office of deacon. They would give the money to the deacons to distribute. But then pretty soon the government said, well, look, if we're coughing up the money, we want a voice in it too. So then they would appoint a government representative to sit in on the diaconal office. Well, the deacon said, yeah, that's all right, I guess if you want to sit there and listen to what's said. Then pretty soon that guy wanted a voice in the matter, see? Well, as long as he had only one vote out of 5, they could outvote him if necessary. But then pretty soon he said, I want a veto, that nothing gets distributed without my approval. And then they said, just a minute here. And the government said, well, take it or leave it. You don't want to do it that way, then you don't get our money anymore. You see, gradually, the government pushed in. And some churches just caved in and said, well, okay, that's the way it is. And other churches said, no, we won't do it.
Well, when the government supported the poor and that needed support through the office of deacon, then there was no giving from the people.
That's right. That's right. And it was especially in those instances where the church refused the money from the government because the government was trying to intrude on her work that the deacons had to go to the people and say, we have to raise the money from you because we refused it from the government. And of course, the people who had been used to the government doing this all these years were not always so happy to do that either. John?
You also have the instance where the government sets a level of poverty that's, in a lot of instances, high, and the church could not be expected, I don't think, to keep up with that. I'm thinking in instances of food stamps. I think there's many years, I myself have had a few years where I could have qualified for food stamps without any problem. And you have Calvin College students who come from wealthy families have been, I don't know if it's in the past 2 years, but before that I know of instances where they came from wealthy families that were on food stamps because that's what the government considered poverty level.
That's right.
The diaconate could, get looked on as not being able to keep up with the government and not having as high as standards.
That's right. And that's tempting too. Tempting for people, therefore, to go to the government rather than the deacons. We can get more out of them than the deacons. The deacons are stingy. I had to laugh once years ago when our children were all home and my wife was reading somewhere out of the press or whatever, and she was reading the latest poverty level. And all of a sudden she gasped. She said, what's the matter? She says, do you know we're below the poverty level? We had never thought we were poor. Yeah, that's right, though, what you say. That's certainly true. Joe, did you have something else?
You don't have any problem, because you don't have the poor going to the government.
Say that, I didn't follow you on that.
Well, you can go to the government, but you're not poor.
Oh, yes, right, right. Anyone else? John?
What about all our older people now in our churches receiving Social Security? That's another.
Yeah, I think Social Security can be classified as an insurance program. I think it can. I don't think, in the minds of the government, it certainly is not a welfare program, and I don't really think it is either. I don't think it is. I doubt whether guys who start paying Social Security by the time when they start working at 17 or 18 or whatever, are ever going to get out of that Social Security program that they put into it. I doubt that very much. In fact, I think that the way the Social Security program is going, you might be lucky to get anything out of it by the time you're ready to retire. But that's neither here nor there. I think it is, I think that can be classified as an insurance program. Gotcha.
And then, what you're saying sort of is, if the deacons find that a person in the congregation is going to the government for a welfare program, it's their responsibility to go to that person and to tell them that the first request should be from the church? And
That's my judgment, yes. That's my judgment. That the deacon should admonish people who seek welfare from the government, who seek their help from the church, on the grounds that the tender mercies of the wicked are cool. And that to receive help from Christ will be for their salvation. Yes. But I say again, I'm not unaware of the problems you men face in this connection, and I'm very sympathetic with those problems too. Anyone else? John?
Shouldn't then we be going, shouldn't it be a discipline problem then of wealthy families who have children taking government aid?
It should be a discipline problem in the sense that these people should be admonished. Whether that ultimately becomes a discipline problem where ecclesiastical censure is applied, that has to be determined by all the circumstances involved. You can't make any broad rules to govern that. Anyone else? Okay, men. That brings our class to a close. I want to conclude with just a couple of remarks. In the first place, some thanks are in order. I'd like to thank Claire, first of all, for all he's done to get these things taped. It's been a great deal of work for you to get all the equipment set up and to take it all down. And I think you're to be commended for that, Claire. I hope others can benefit from these through your work. Thanks to Jim for being our pianist. Thanks to you all for coming. I really appreciated the attendance at these meetings. I thought it was great. It was far beyond my expectations. And I was saying to Neil on the way over here that I was greatly encouraged myself by these meetings, and greatly encouraged by them because your attendance here and your participation in the discussions and your interest in the whole work of the Office of Deacons leads me to conclude that the Office of Deacons is a healthy office in our churches, especially as represented here. I have the distinct impression, and I'm very grateful to God for that. And we have deacons in our congregations who are working hard in their office to fulfill the work and responsibilities which Christ has laid upon them. And I'm most thankful for that, because as I said, the welfare of the church depends upon